the little girl was standing alone in the storm. Clara Whitmore saw her only when the hired carriage had already begun to pull away, its wheels grinding through the mud as though the driver feared Blackwood Hall might reach after him and demand that he remain. For one wild instant, Clara considered calling him back. She had arrived at a strange estate after nightfall, drenched from the rain, carrying one small trunk and a reputation no respectable household should have welcomed. The manor rising beyond the iron gates seemed less like a home than a judgment carved from black stone. Then lightning spread across the Yorkshire sky, and Clara saw the child clearly. She could not have been more than 6 years old. She stood beneath the shallow shelter of the front portico in a pale nightdress, with no cloak over her shoulders and no shoes upon her feet. Rain had blown beneath the stone arch, darkening the hem around her ankles. In one hand she clutched a sealed letter. In the other she held a small silver frame against her chest. Good heavens! Clara gathered her skirts and hurried up the steps. The child did not move. Her face was very pale beneath a fall of dark curls, and her eyes followed Clara with the grave attention of someone who had been waiting far longer than any child should have waited. "Are you hurt?" Clara asked. No answer. Clara set down her valise and removed her wet cloak. She wrapped it around the child's narrow shoulders, though the wool was nearly soaked through. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I have come to serve as your governess. You must be, Lady Rose." The girl's gaze dropped to the chain at Clara's throat. Clara instinctively touched the object, hidden beneath her collar. Her mother's old ring had slipped free during the journey, its worn gold surface now visible against her grey travelling dress. Clara tucked it away again. "You should be indoors," she said gently. "Has no one noticed you are missing?" Still, the child said nothing. Clara had been warned about Lady Rose's silence. The agency's letter described a delicate young ward who had spoken very little since the death of the Duke's younger brother. It had not mentioned midnight wanderings, bare feet, or sealed letters held in trembling fingers. Nor had it explained why the Duke of Blackwood had employed a woman whose name had appeared in every cruel drawing-room, whisper from London to Bath. Clara lowered herself until they were nearly eye to eye. "I know we have only just met," she said, "but I promise I shall not scold you. Will you come inside with me?" The girl looked at Clara's face as though searching for someone behind it. Then her expression broke. The sealed letter slipped from her hand. She flung both arms around Clara's neck with such desperate force that Clara nearly lost her balance on the rain-slick stone. "Mother," the child whispered. The word was small, scarcely louder than the storm, yet it entered Clara like a blade of memory. Only 7 weeks had passed since she had stood in a village church, wearing a borrowed ivory gown, waiting for a bridegroom who never came. She had remained before the altar until the candles burned low, and the guests stopped, pretending he might still arrive. By sunset, everyone knew why Nathaniel Crowe had abandoned her. A jeweled brooch had disappeared from her employer's dressing room, and although no proof had been found against Clara, suspicion had been enough. A woman without fortune could survive poverty. A woman without reputation could not survive anything. Clara closed her eyes and held the child more firmly. "I am not your mother," she said softly, "but I shall not leave you standing here alone." A door opened behind them. Warm candlelight spilled across the steps, followed by the long shadow of a man. The child stiffened in Clara's arms. Clara rose slowly and turned. The Duke of Blackwood stood in the doorway. Julian Ashcombe was taller than she had imagined, dressed entirely in black, except for the white line of his shirt at the throat. He had neither the softened features nor the decorative elegance favored by fashionable gentlemen. His face was severe, his dark hair slightly disordered, as though someone had summoned him before he had finished preparing for the evening. He regarded Clara with a stillness more unsettling than anger. His gaze moved from her face to the child in her arms. "Rose, The girl buried her face against Clara's shoulder. Something changed in the Duke's expression. It vanished so quickly Clara might have imagined it, but for one instant his composure gave way to naked alarm. "You should not be outside," he said. Rose's fingers tightened in Clara's dress. Clara lifted her chin. "She was standing alone when I arrived. I can see that, without shoes. I can also see that there was no warmth in his tone, yet neither was there indifference." He descended the steps and stopped before them. His attention rested upon Rose, as though the entire storm had narrowed to the child's cold hands. "Come inside," he said. Rose did not obey. The Duke looked at Clara. "Give her to me. She appears frightened. She is my ward. And at this moment, Your Grace, she is frightened." The silence between them felt as sharp as the rain. No one had warned Clara that Julian Ashcombe could command obedience merely by withholding speech. She understood immediately why servants feared him, why noblemen measured their words in his presence, and why his name had reached even the quiet country rooms where Clara had once taught French verbs and music scales. But she had already lost her employment, her engagement, and nearly every friendship she had believed secure. Fear had very little left to take from her. The Duke extended one hand toward Rose, not touching her. After several seconds, the child lifted her head. Julian's voice softened, though only slightly. "Mrs. Bell has been looking for you." Rose glanced toward the open doorway. An older woman in a dark gown stood inside, pale with distress. At last, the child allowed Clara to lower her to the ground. Yet she did not release Clara's hand. Together they entered Blackwood Hall. The entrance chamber was vast and dim, lit by wall sconces and a fire burning beneath a carved stone mantel. An ancestral portrait dominated the opposite wall. A stern gentleman, wearing the same cold authority Julian carried without effort. A servant retrieved Clara's valise. Mrs. Bell knelt to wrap Rose in a blanket, murmuring apologies and questions the child ignored. Clara bent to collect the sealed letter from the floor. The Duke reached it first. He examined the black wax. The impression showed a bird with outstretched wings above a crown. Clara felt Rose's hand tightened around hers again. "Who gave this to you?" Julian asked. Rose said nothing. He broke the seal. As he unfolded the paper, Clara saw his eyes move across the first line. His expression did not change, but the hand holding the letter became perfectly still. "What does it say?" Clara asked. His gaze lifted to her. Before he could answer, a sudden gust swept through the open doorway. Clara's wet collar shifted, and the gold ring slipped once more into view. Julian stared at it, not with curiosity, with recognition. He crossed the distance between them so swiftly that Clara stepped back. He did not touch her, but his eyes remained fixed upon the ring. "Where did you get that?" "It belonged to my mother." "What was her name?" "Eleanor Whitmore." The fire cracked behind him. For the first time since appearing in the doorway, Julian Ashcombe looked uncertain. He turned the letter so Clara could see the message written across the page in faded black ink. "The woman who carries the ring must remain with Rose until the truth is known." Clara read the sentence twice. "I do not understand. I believe that makes two of us." "You knew about this ring," his silence answered before he did. Clara pulled the chain beneath her collar. "Your Grace, I was employed to teach Lady Rose. Whatever private matter this letter concerns, it has nothing to do with me." Julian folded the paper carefully. Then he looked toward the servants gathered at the edge of the hall. "Close the doors." The heavy entrance doors shut, muting the storm to a distant roar. Clara's pulse quickened. "I should like to be shown to my room. You will be. And in the morning you may explain why my mother's ring is known in this house." Julian studied her with an expression she could not read. "You misunderstand, Miss Whitmore. You were not brought to Blackwood Hall merely to teach my ward." Rose's small hand slipped into Clara's once more. The Duke lowered his voice. "You were brought here because my family has been searching for you." For several seconds, Clara could hear nothing but the rain beating against the tall windows. My family has been searching for you." The words sounded absurd in the vast entrance hall, surrounded by ancestral faces that seemed to watch her from their gilded frames. Clara looked from Julian to the sealed letter, still held between his fingers. "You cannot possibly expect me to believe that. I do not require belief from you tonight." "Then what do you require?" Before Julian could answer, Rose swayed beside Clara. The child's fingers had become cold around hers. Whatever mystery had brought Clara to Blackwood Hall would have to wait. "She needs warmth," Clara said, "and something dry to wear." Mrs. Bell hurried forward. "I shall take her upstairs at once." Rose immediately pressed herself against Clara's skirts. The housekeeper's worried gaze moved to Julian. Clara crouched beside the child. "I shall come with you." "Miss Whitmore has travelled all day," Julian said. "She should be shown to her own room." Rose shook her head. It was a small movement, but the Duke noticed it. His jaw tightened, not in anger at the child, but at his own inability to soothe her. Clara wondered how often that expression had caused others to mistake helplessness for severity. "I do not mind," she said. Julian studied Rose's hand in hers, then gave a brief nod. "Remain with her until she sleeps." It was phrased as an order, though Clara suspected it was the nearest he could come to asking Mrs. Bell led them through a corridor lined with dark wooden panels and silent portraits. Rose's chamber was warm, filled with books, painted animals, and a dollhouse grander than many real cottages Clara had known. Yet the room did not feel like a child's refuge. Everything was too carefully arranged, as though no one dared disturb it. Clara helped Rose into a clean nightdress, while Mrs. Bell ordered warm milk from the kitchen. The little girl spoke no further word, but she watched Clara continuously. When Clara settled beside her on the bed, Rose reached beneath her pillow and withdrew the silver miniature she had carried outside. She placed it in Clara's palm. Inside was the portrait of a young woman with dark hair and gentle brown eyes. Clara's breath caught. The woman did not resemble Clara exactly. Her face was narrower, her expression more guarded, but something in the curve of her mouth and the shape of her eyes brought Clara's mother painfully to mind. "Who is she?" Clara asked. Rose touched the portrait and then pointed toward the floor, as though indicating somewhere deep beneath the house. Before Clara could ask another question, the child lay down and closed her eyes. Mrs. Bell entered quietly with the milk, but Rose was already asleep. The housekeeper drew the blankets higher around her. "She has not trusted a stranger since Lord Adrian died," she whispered. "The Duke's brother. Yes, His Grace became her guardian afterward. Where are Rose's parents?" Mrs. Bell's expression closed. "That is not for me to say." Clara looked down at the miniature. "Does this woman belong to the family?" "I have served at Blackwood for 32 years, Miss Whitmore. There are questions one learns not to ask if one wishes to remain." Clara handed the miniature back to Rose and rose from the bed. "At the door, Mrs." Bell hesitated. "His Grace may appear hard," she said, "but whatever you think of him, do not doubt that he would surrender everything in this house before allowing harm to come to that child." Clara remembered the fear that had flashed across Julian's face on the front steps. "I do not yet know what to think of him. That is perhaps wiser than deciding too soon." Julian was waiting in the library. He stood beside a long table, where the sealed letter had been placed beside several older documents. A fire burned low in the grate. Across the room, shelves climbed toward a painted ceiling, holding generations of family records. Clara remained near the door. "You will explain now. I intend to." That would be a refreshing change. A faint movement touched the corner of his mouth, but it disappeared before it became a smile. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore. I would prefer to stand, as you wish." A grey-haired gentleman rose from an armchair. Clara had not noticed. He wore a sober black coat and carried a leather case beneath one arm. "This is Mr. Elias Fenwick," Julian said. "My family's solicitor." Fenwick bowed. "I regret that we must meet under unusual circumstances. Unusual circumstances appear to be the only sort permitted at Blackwood Hall. The solicitor glanced toward Julian, uncertain whether she had overstepped. Julian merely gestured toward the table. Fenwick opened his case and withdrew a folded document bearing several seals. "This is a codicil attached to the late Duke of Blackwood's will. It was deposited with my office shortly before his death, but was not to be opened unless one of two conditions occurred." "What conditions?" "The return of a particular family ring or the arrival of a woman bearing the surname Whitmore." Clara touched the chain hidden beneath her collar. "My mother never spoke of this family." "That does not mean this family never spoke of her," Julian said. Fenwick unfolded the document. "According to the codicil, should Eleanor Whitmore or one of her lawful children enter Blackwood Hall while Lady Rose remained a minor, an inquiry into the child's parentage must begin immediately." Clara stared at him. "What could my mother possibly have to do with Rose?" "That," Julian said, "is what we are attempting to discover." Fenwick continued. "Until the inquiry is complete, both the Duke and the Whitmore representative are required to remain at Blackwood Hall and cooperate in examining all relevant records." Clara nearly laughed. "Required by whom? A dead man? By the conditions governing several portions of the estate." Julian moved toward the fire, his shoulders rigid. "If either of us refuses," he said, "control of Blackwood Hall may pass temporarily to appointed trustees." Clara looked around the library. "You expect me to believe your estate depends upon whether I remain employed as a governess. Your employment is no longer the central issue. It remains central to me. I accepted this position because my brother requires support. I did not agree to become part of an inheritance dispute. You will be paid." Her face warmed. "I am not discussing the price of my obedience." Julian turned from the fire. "Nor am I attempting to purchase it. You investigated me before I arrived. You knew my name, you knew about the ring. Yet you allowed me to enter this house without the slightest warning. I knew only that Eleanor Whitmore had a surviving daughter. You knew enough to arrange my employment." Fenwick shifted uncomfortably, but Julian did not deny it. Clara understood. The recommendation she had received from the agency had seemed miraculous. A respectable position at a ducal estate, offered to a woman whose previous employer had accused her of theft. She had believed someone, somewhere, had chosen to judge her fairly. Instead, she had been selected because of her blood. "My former employer would never have recommended me." "No," Julian said. "She would not." "Then who persuaded her?" "I did." The answer landed with greater force than Clara expected. "You paid her." "I convinced her that repeating an unproven accusation against you might expose her to legal scrutiny." "You threatened her." "I reminded her of the truth." Clara turned away, ashamed of the sudden relief rising beneath her anger. Someone had defended her, though not for the reasons she had wanted. "What exactly was I accused of stealing?" Julian asked. "A jeweled brooch. What design?" "I do not know why that matters." "What design, Miss Whitmore?" She looked back at him. A gold bird with its wings spread above a crown. Fenwick's face lost its color. Julian crossed to the letter and placed his finger over the black wax seal. The same emblem. Stared up at her, Clara felt the room grow colder. "The brooch belonged to my employer," she said. "No," Julian replied. "It belonged to my family." He lifted his gaze to hers. "And it disappeared from Blackwood Hall on the same night that Eleanor Whitmore left this house 28 years ago." Clara stared at the black wax seal until the bird and crown blurred before her eyes. "The brooch was stolen from Blackwood Hall?" she asked. "Removed," Julian corrected. "Whether it was stolen depends upon who carried it away and why. You believe my mother took it. I believe she was the last person known to possess it." Clara drew herself upright. "My mother was not a thief. I did not say she was. You did not need to." Julian's expression hardened, but Mr. Fenwick stepped between them before either could speak again. "The records from that period are incomplete," the solicitor said. "Several household accounts were destroyed. and the servants employed at the time were dismissed within a matter of weeks. We have no proof that Mrs. Whitmore acted dishonestly. Then why was her name placed in the late Duke's will? That is precisely what must be discovered. Clara looked toward the tall windows. The storm had begun to weaken, leaving pale streams of rain upon the glass. Somewhere above them, Rose slept beneath Clara's damp cloak, trusting a stranger because of a face she seemed to remember. Clara felt suddenly exhausted. "I shall remain until the roads are passable," she said. "After that, I will decide what assistance I am willing to give. The Codicil does not permit. Your Codicil does not own me, Your Grace." Julian's eyes held hers. "No," he said quietly. "It does not." His answer unsettled her more than another command would have done. The following morning, Blackwood Hall seemed no less severe beneath the light of day. Mist pressed against the windows, obscuring the distant gardens and turning the estate into an island surrounded by white silence. Clara was awakened by a maid who introduced herself as Ellen and informed her that Lady Rose had refused breakfast until her new governess appeared. The schoolroom occupied the eastern corner of the second floor. It was a smaller, brighter room than Clara expected, with shelves of children's books, a globe beside the window, and a blackboard upon which someone had written the alphabet in a careful adult hand. Rose sat at the table with a bowl of untouched porridge before her. Mrs. Bell stood nearby, trying not to look relieved when Clara entered. "Good morning," Clara said. Rose watched her but did not answer. Clara took the chair opposite the child. "I am told you have defeated Mrs. Bell in a battle involving breakfast." Mrs. Bell made a sound that might have been a cough. Rose glanced at the porridge. "I should warn you that I possess very little experience in warfare," Clara continued. "But I am exceptionally skilled at negotiating with stubborn young ladies." The smallest hint of interest entered the child's eyes. Clara pushed the bowl slightly closer. "3 spoonfuls, and you may choose our first lesson." Rose considered this. Then she picked up the spoon. Mrs. Bell left the room with suspicious haste. After the 3rd spoonful, Rose climbed down from her chair and went to the shelves. She returned carrying a book of fables and placed it before Clara. "Shall I read, or will you?" Rose touched her own chest. Clara opened the book. The child began haltingly, her voice so soft that the rain against the windows nearly covered it. She stumbled over several words but refused Clara's help until she reached the end of the first page. It was the most Rose had spoken since Clara's arrival. Neither of them noticed Julian standing beyond the half-open door. He remained there without entering, one hand resting upon the frame. His attention was fixed upon Rose, but when the child finished the second page, his gaze moved to Clara. For the first time there was no suspicion in it, only wonder. Clara pretended not to see him. Later that morning, Mrs. Bell escorted her through the family wing. The housekeeper explained which rooms Clara might use, and which remained closed by order of the Duke. They had nearly reached the portrait gallery when a woman in a deep green morning gown approached from the opposite corridor. She was perhaps 55, elegant and striking, with silver threaded through dark hair arranged perfectly beneath a lace cap. A younger man walked at her side, handsome in the careless manner of someone long protected from consequence. "Miss Whitmore," the woman said. At last Mrs. Bell's shoulders stiffened. Clara curtsied. "My lady, I am Lady Honoria Ashcombe, the late Duke's sister. This is my son, Lord Marcus Vale." Marcus bowed with easy charm. "The famous governess. I was not aware I had achieved fame. In this house, anyone who captures Rose's attention becomes a subject of discussion." Lady Honoria's gaze descended briefly to the chain at Clara's throat. "You resemble your mother." Clara went still. "You knew her. I remember many people who passed through Blackwood Hall." "That is not an answer." Marcus's brows lifted, amused by Clara's directness. Lady Honoria smiled without warmth. "You will find, Miss Whitmore, that answers in old families are rarely as simple as questions." She moved closer. Rose is a vulnerable child. Attachment comes easily to those who have suffered abandonment. It would be unkind to encourage her confusion. I have made no claim upon her. Not yet, Mrs. Bell stepped forward. Lady Rose is waiting for her lesson. Lady Honoria ignored her. Your position here is temporary, she told Clara. Whatever document Julian has discovered, whatever romantic importance he has attached to that old ring, you remain an employee. Clara met her eyes. I have never mistaken employment for kinship. See that you do not. Lady Honoria continued down the corridor. Marcus lingered a moment. My mother values order, he said lightly. Does she? Above almost everything, he followed her before Clara could reply, Mrs. Bell waited until they were out of hearing. You should be cautious with Lady Honoria. Is that advice or instruction? Both. That afternoon, Clara returned to the schoolroom and found Rose waiting beside the window. The silver miniature lay open upon the table. The child pointed toward the portrait gallery. You wish to go there? Rose nodded. The gallery stretched along the western side of the house, lined with generations of Ashcombes. Dukes, duchesses, and solemn children stared down from painted landscapes and candlelit interiors. Rose led Clara past each portrait until they reached one partly hidden behind a heavy curtain. It showed two young men standing beside the late Duke. Clara recognized Julian at once, though he could not have been more than 20. Beside him stood a younger man with lighter hair and a more open expression, Lord Adrian. Rose pointed first to Adrian and then to the woman inside the miniature. Your father? Clara asked. Rose nodded. Clara studied the small painted face. And this woman was your mother. The child lowered her eyes. Before Clara could question her further, Rose pressed the miniature into her hands. The frame was cold and heavier than it appeared. Clara ran one finger along the silver edge and felt a slight break in the metal. A hidden clasp opened beneath her touch. The painted portrait lifted from its setting. Behind it lay a narrow strip of yellowed paper, folded twice and marked with half of a dark red seal. Clara unfolded it carefully. Only a few words remained legible. Lawfully joined before witnesses, the rest had been torn away. On the inside of the silver frame, 2 sets of initials had been scratched by hand. M. Clara heard footsteps behind her. Julian stood at the entrance to the gallery, his face unreadable. She held up the miniature. Who was Margaret Whitmore? He did not answer immediately. Then Rose spoke from beside Clara, her voice clear enough to carry through the silent gallery. My mother. Rose's voice seemed to alter the air inside the gallery. Clara looked down at the child, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. Rose stood with one hand resting against the portrait of Lord Adrian, her expression solemn but no longer frightened. Margaret Whitmore was your mother? Clara asked. Rose nodded. Julian crossed the gallery slowly. The composure he wore before servants and guests had vanished, leaving something far more difficult to understand. How do you know that name? He asked. Rose touched the miniature in Clara's hand. Did your father tell you? The child shook her head. Who then? Rose turned toward the portraits lining the wall. She pointed farther down the gallery, toward a painting almost concealed between 2 immense landscapes. Julian followed her gesture. I have seen every portrait in this house. Rose shook her head again. Clara studied the child's face. Perhaps she does not mean a portrait that can be seen now. Julian looked at her. You believe one has been removed? I believe Rose has been trying to tell someone something for a very long time. The child took Clara's hand and led them toward the far end of the gallery. The portrait Rose had indicated showed the late Duke seated beside his wife. Julian and Adrian stood behind them, as young men, both dressed formally, their faces bearing little resemblance beyond the dark Ashcombe eyes. At first, Clara noticed nothing unusual. Then she saw a faint shape beside Adrian's shoulder. The painted curtain in the background was darker there, as though another layer of pigment had been applied over it. Beneath the black folds, Clara could make out the pale suggestion of a hand. "There was someone else in this portrait," she said. Julian stepped nearer. "That is impossible. It has hung here since before Adrian's death. Then whoever altered it did so while it remained in the house." He examined the surface. The muscles along his jaw tightened. Rose reached upward, trying to touch the lower edge of the frame. Clara lifted her. Behind a carved wooden ornament was a small indentation in the shape of an oval. Julian stared at it. The ring. Clara's hand rose instinctively to the chain at her throat. "You expect me to place it there?" "I expect nothing, but the shape is exact." She hesitated before removing the chain. The ring had belonged to her mother for as long as Clara could remember. Eleanor Whitmore had worn it beneath her dress, and had never explained where it came from. On the night before her death, she had pressed it into Clara's palm and made her promise never to sell it, regardless of how desperate their circumstances became. Clara had kept that promise even when Thomas's debts grew and food became scarce. She fitted the ring into the hidden indentation. A quiet click sounded within the frame. Rose leaned closer. A narrow panel opened behind the carved ornament, revealing a shallow compartment darkened by dust. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Julian removed them carefully and placed them on a table beneath the portrait. The paper had yellowed, and several pages bore stains left by age or dampness. Clara recognized the handwriting before she read a single word. Her mother's letters had been rare, usually brief notes left beside Clara's breakfast when Eleanor departed early for work. The sloping letters and narrow spaces between words had remained in Clara's memory long after the messages themselves were lost. "This is her hand," she whispered. Julian untied the ribbon. The first letter was addressed to Adrian Ashcombe. "My lord, Margaret has agreed to meet you at the old hunting lodge. Though she fears your father has discovered everything, she will not abandon the child, whatever is demanded of her. If you mean to protect them, you must act before Lady Honoria returns from London." Clara stopped reading. She wrote of Margaret as though she knew her well. Julian turned to the next page. The lower half had been torn away. Only a few sentences remained. "The marriage is lawful. Abigail witnessed it, and the register the rest was missing." "Who is Abigail?" Clara asked. "I do not know." Julian opened another letter. It contained no signature, only a warning. The brooch must not remain at Blackwood. The evidence inside it is no longer safe. Eleanor will carry it until Margaret and the child can leave. Clara's thoughts returned to the jeweled brooch she had been accused of stealing. The same brooch had vanished from this house 28 years earlier. Years later, it had appeared in the dressing room of Clara's former employer, only to disappear again on the day Clara's reputation was destroyed. "This was planned," she said. "Someone knew the brooch had returned." Julian's expression darkened. "And someone believed you possessed whatever had been hidden inside it." "I never touched it. I believe you." The certainty in his voice surprised her. "You did not believe me last night. I did not know enough last night, and now I know that whoever placed that brooch near you intended more than your dismissal." Clara looked toward Rose. The child had moved to the window at the end of the gallery and was tracing circles through the dust on the glass. "Why would my mother hide these letters here? Perhaps she did not." Julian examined the ribbon. A small wax fragment remained attached to the knot. The letters were sealed with Adrian's signet. He may have hidden them himself. Then why leave the mechanism to be opened by my mother's ring? Because he trusted her. Clara moved closer to the painting. Beneath the heavy layer of dark paint, the erased figure stood beside Adrian. The outline suggested a young woman in a pale gown. Her hand rested upon the back of his chair, with a familiarity no servant would have been permitted to display in a formal family portrait. Clara climbed onto a small library ladder kept against the gallery wall. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, looking for the edge of the later paint. "The ladder is unstable. So is your family history." She reached toward the portrait. "Miss Whitmore, if you intend to order me down, Your Grace, you should know that I have become remarkably resistant to orders. I had noticed." Clara leaned closer. Near the woman's painted shoulder, a thin crack ran through the darker pigment. She touched it lightly. A small flake loosened. Beneath it appeared a strand of chestnut hair. Clara's breath caught. The ladder shifted. For one terrifying instant, the gallery tilted around her. Julian caught her before she struck the floor. One arm closed firmly around her waist, while his other hand steadied her shoulder. Clara found herself held against him, her palm pressed to his chest, close enough to feel the sudden force of his breathing. Neither of them spoke. His face was only inches from hers. The severity that usually governed his expression had disappeared. He looked not angry, but shaken. "You might have fallen," he said. "I believe I did." His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth before returning to her eyes. Clara became aware of Rose watching them from the window. Julian released her at once and stepped back. "You should not climb unstable ladders. You should not keep unstable ladders beneath altered portraits." A faint, unwilling smile appeared on his face. It changed him so completely that Clara forgot her reply. Then footsteps approached from the corridor. Lady Honoria entered the gallery. Her gaze moved from Clara's flushed face to Julian's hand, still resting upon the ladder. She then saw the open compartment, the letters upon the table, and the missing flake of paint. For the first time, her elegant composure faltered. "What have you done?" Julian placed himself between his aunt and the documents. "We discovered what someone attempted to erase." Lady Honoria's eyes fixed upon Clara. "You have been in this house less than 2 days, and already you are forcing open family possessions. The compartment was designed for my mother's ring. That ring was never hers." Clara stepped forward. "Then whose was it?" Honoria did not answer. Rose came to Clara's side and took her hand. Julian lifted one of Eleanor's letters. "Who was Margaret Whitmore?" Lady Honoria's face became very still. No one whose name should be spoken before the child. Rose looked directly at her. "She was my mother." Honoria's gaze snapped toward the girl. In that instant, Clara saw something colder than surprise in the older woman's expression. Fear. Lady Honoria recovered quickly. "Rose is confused. Miss Whitmore has encouraged a fantasy." "I did not give her the name," Clara said. "She gave it to us." Julian opened another letter from the bundle. This one was addressed to him. The ink had faded, but his name remained clearly visible across the folded page. He broke the brittle seal and read in silence. Clara watched the color leave his face. "What does it say?" Julian continued reading until he reached the final line. Then he looked at Rose. "My brother wrote this 3 days before he died." His voice was low and unsteady. "He said that if anything happened to him, I was to protect his wife and daughter from the person inside Blackwood Hall who had already betrayed them once." No one spoke for several moments. The rain had ceased, but water still moved through the gutters outside, falling in a slow, hollow rhythm beyond the gallery windows. Julian stood beneath the altered portrait with Adrian's letter in his hand, while Rose pressed herself against Clara's side. "The person inside Blackwood Hall," Clara repeated. "Did your brother name them?" Julian looked again at the page. No, Lady Honoria gave a quiet breath that sounded almost like relief. "Adrian was grieving and unwell during his final weeks," she said. "You cannot build an accusation upon the fears of a dead man." Julian folded the letter carefully. "I have made no accusation. You scarcely need to. You open hidden compartments, question the family's servants, and allow a stranger to disturb Rose with stories she cannot understand." Clara felt Rose's fingers tighten around hers. She understood her mother's name. She repeated a word she may have overheard. "From whom?" Lady Honoria's gaze sharpened. "You have been here 2 days, Miss Whitmore. Do not imagine familiarity with a grieving child gives you authority over this family." "No," Clara said. "But neither does a title give anyone the right to erase the child's mother from a portrait." Marcus appeared in the doorway behind his mother. He had evidently heard enough to understand the danger in the room. Though his expression remained carefully pleasant, perhaps this is not the best setting for a family disagreement. Julian turned toward him. It ceased to be merely a family matter when Clara was falsely accused using an Ashcombe brooch. Lady Honoria glanced at Clara. Clara, the single word carried more accusation than any formal rebuke. Julian seemed to realize what he had done. His face returned at once to its usual reserve. "Miss Whitmore," he corrected. Clara looked away before anyone could read too much in her expression. Lady Honoria walked to the table and reached for the bundle of letters. Julian placed one hand over them. "They remain with me. You cannot seriously suspect a member of this household. I suspect anyone who fears the truth." Their eyes met. For the first time, Clara understood that Lady Honoria's influence over Blackwood Hall did not come merely from age or family position. She had governed Julian through duty for years, perhaps by convincing him that every threat to the family required greater silence. Honoria withdrew her hand. "Then we must ensure the truth is examined before witnesses," she said. "You have already permitted rumors to begin. If society hears that a disgraced governess has arrived carrying a family ring and claiming kinship with Rose, speculation will become impossible to contain." "I have claimed nothing," Clara said. "Society rarely waits for a claim." Lady Honoria turned to Julian. "The autumn gathering will proceed," he frowned. "I cancelled it after Adrian's death. You postponed it. The trustees, neighboring families, and several men with an interest in the estate are already traveling north. If you refuse to receive them now, they will assume you have something to conceal." "I do have something to conceal," Julian said. "The identity of the person who betrayed my brother." Marcus's easy expression vanished. His mother remained calm. "Then all the more reason to observe who becomes anxious when the subject is raised." Julian looked toward the damaged portrait. After a long silence, he said, 3 days, no more." Lady Honoria inclined her head as though the decision had been hers from the beginning. By the following evening, Blackwood Hall had changed. Carriages rolled through the gates beneath a pale sky. Footmen carried trunks into the entrance hall. Fires were lit in rooms Clara had thought abandoned, and the corridors filled with voices, perfume, and the rustle of costly fabric. Clara had no desire to attend the formal dinner. Lady Honoria ensured that she had no choice. "Rose refuses to enter the drawing room without you," Mrs. Bell explained as she helped fasten the back of Clara's dark blue gown. "His Grace believes forcing the child will do more harm than allowing you to accompany her. The guests will consider it improper. The guests consider breathing improper when done by the wrong person." Clara almost smiled. The gown had belonged to Julian's late sister and had been altered overnight. It was elegant but modest, with long sleeves and a square neckline. Clara suspected Lady Honoria had approved it only because refusing Rose would have attracted more attention. Mrs. Bell arranged Clara's hair, then reached toward the chain at her throat. "You may wish to hide the ring." Clara covered it with her hand. "No." The housekeeper met her eyes in the mirror. "Then keep your courage close as well." The drawing room was crowded when Clara entered with Rose. Conversation faltered. Clara recognized the moment when curiosity became judgment. Several women looked directly at the ring. Others pretended not to see it while whispering behind gloved hands. Julian stood near the fireplace, speaking with 2 older gentlemen. His gaze found Clara immediately. For one brief second, the room seemed to disappear around them. Then he looked at Rose and held out his hand. The child took Clara's instead. A shadow crossed Julian's face, though he concealed it before the guests could notice. Lady Honoria approached with a woman dressed in silver silk. "Miss Whitmore, may I present Lady Cecily Harcourt? Her father serves among the estate trustees." Lady Cecily was beautiful in the polished manner of a woman who had been taught never to appear uncertain. "I have heard a great deal about you," she said. "That is unfortunate," Clara replied. Cecily's smile tightened. Before Lady Honoria could respond, a man's voice came from behind them. Clara always did possess a talent for making an entrance. She knew the voice before she turned. Nathaniel Crowe stood near the doorway. He looked exactly as he had on the morning he was supposed to marry her, handsome, carefully dressed, and entirely untouched by the consequences of his choices. Rose moved closer to Clara. Nathaniel bowed. "Miss Whitmore." Clara's throat closed, but she forced herself to answer. "Mr. Crowe." Lady Honoria watched them with practiced surprise. "You are acquainted." "We were once engaged," Nathaniel said. The room grew quieter. "And the engagement ended?" Lady Cecily asked. Nathaniel lowered his gaze with the appearance of regret. Under difficult circumstances, Clara understood at once why he had been invited. She looked at Lady Honoria, but the older woman's expression revealed nothing. Nathaniel stepped nearer. "I had hoped time might have encouraged discretion." "Time has encouraged accuracy," Clara said. "You abandoned me at the altar after an accusation you never asked me to explain." A murmur passed through the guests. Nathaniel sighed. "The brooch was found missing from the room under your care." "It was never found in my possession." "No, but your sudden employment in a ducal household suggests you have always been skilled at finding opportunities above your station." Rose's face changed. Clara felt the child preparing to speak, perhaps to defend her, and pressed her hand gently. She would not allow Rose to become part of this cruelty. Nathaniel looked toward Julian. "Your Grace, I speak only because you may not know the full history of the woman you have admitted into your home." Julian set down his glass. "I know she was accused without evidence." Nathaniel hesitated. "The circumstances were persuasive. Persuasion is not proof." Lady Honoria intervened. "Julian, Mr. Crowe has no reason to deceive us." "Every coward requires a reason for cowardice," Julian said. "Mr. Crowe appears to have chosen reputation." The room became perfectly still. Nathaniel's face reddened. "I withdrew from a marriage that would have ruined my family. You withdrew without granting her the dignity of your presence." Julian walked to Clara's side. He did not touch her, but the guests shifted as though he had drawn a visible boundary around her. "Miss Whitmore is here under the authority of the estate investigation," he said. "Any accusation against her will be supported by evidence or withdrawn." Nathaniel looked at Clara with something colder than embarrassment. "You defend her very quickly." "No," Julian replied. "Society condemned her very quickly. I am merely refusing to imitate it." Lady Honoria's expression remained composed, but her fingers tightened around her fan. Dinner was announced before the confrontation could deepen. Clara expected Julian to leave her among the lesser guests. Instead, he offered her his arm. She stared at it. "This will create more talk. There is already talk. You cannot silence every person in this house." "No, but I can decide whose judgment governs my conduct." Clara placed her hand lightly upon his sleeve. During dinner, Nathaniel was seated across from them. He spoke charmingly to Lady Cecily and behaved as though the earlier humiliation had never occurred. Clara barely tasted the food. Afterward, musicians assembled in the ballroom. Rose remained beside Clara while the first couples took their places. When Julian approached, the child looked from him to Clara. Then she took his hand and placed it over Clara's. "Dance," she said. Clara's breath caught. Around them, several guests turned to watch. Julian looked at her. "You may refuse." She heard no command in his voice. That made refusal more difficult. "One dance," she said. He led her onto the floor. The orchestra began a slow country dance. Julian moved with controlled precision, though his attention never left her face. "You should not have defended me," Clara said. "Would you have preferred that I agreed with him? I would have preferred not to require rescue." "You did not require it." "Then why intervene?" "Because truth should not depend upon whether its subject is strong enough to survive a room full of liars." The answer unsettled her. You cannot defend my reputation while concealing the reasons you brought me here." His hand tightened slightly around hers. "This is neither the time nor the place. That is what powerful men say when they wish inconvenient questions to disappear." His gaze darkened. "And what do disappointed women say when they have already decided the answer?" Clara stepped closer as the dance required. "I say that protection without honesty is merely another elegant form of control." For the first time, Julian missed a step, only slightly, but she felt it. When the music ended, he released her hand at once. Clara turned away before he could reply. Nathaniel was waiting near the open doors to the terrace. "You should be careful," he said quietly. "I have already survived your concern once." His expression hardened. "You believe the Duke discovered you by chance?" Clara stopped. Nathaniel glanced toward Julian, who was speaking with one of the trustees. "He sent inquiries about you months before the brooch disappeared." "That is impossible. He knew your mother's name. He knew where your brother lived. He knew you were engaged." Clara felt the ballroom tilt around her. Nathaniel leaned closer. "Ask him why he was searching for Clara Whitmore long before you ever received an offer from Blackwood Hall." Clara did not remember leaving the ballroom. One moment she stood beneath the chandeliers, with Nathaniel's warning still echoing in her ears. The next, she was in the portrait gallery, surrounded by painted faces and the faint smell of extinguished candles. "He sent inquiries about you months before the brooch disappeared." Julian had known her mother's name. He had known where Thomas lived. He had known she was engaged. And still, he had allowed Clara to believe Blackwood Hall had opened its doors to her because someone had finally judged her by her work rather than by rumor. Footsteps sounded behind her. She did not turn. "You left without Rose," Julian said. "Mrs. Bell took her upstairs." "Are you unwell?" Clara looked at the altered family portrait. The narrow compartment remained open, though the letters had been removed to Julian's study for safekeeping. "How long were you searching for me?" The silence behind her was answer enough. Clara turned slowly. Julian had dismissed the servants and removed his formal coat. Without it, he appeared less like the Duke of Blackwood and more like a tired man who had spent too many years guarding secrets. "That depends upon what you mean by searching," he said. "I mean, when did you first send someone to ask questions about Clara Whitmore?" 7 months ago, the answer struck her with humiliating force. 7 months ago, she had still believed she would marry Nathaniel. "You knew I was engaged." "Yes, you knew about my brother's debts." "Yes, you knew where I worked." "Yes, and you knew I had been accused before the offer from Blackwood arrived." Julian's gaze did not shift. "I learned of the accusation on the day your former employer dismissed you." Clara laughed once, though there was no amusement in it. "You learned very quickly. I had asked Mr. Fenwick to inform me of any change in your circumstances. How thoughtful. It was not intended as kindness. No, I understand that now." Julian stepped closer. "You do not understand enough. Then explain it." He looked toward the gallery entrance, as though measuring how far his voice might carry. "After Adrian's death, I found a list of names hidden inside his desk. Most belonged to former servants. Your mother's name had been marked twice. Beneath it, Adrian had written yours." Clara's anger faltered. "He knew my name? I do not know whether he knew you personally, but he knew Eleanor Whitmore had a daughter named Clara and a son named Thomas. Why did you not tell me this when I arrived? Because the list also contained a warning." "What warning?" Julian's expression tightened. "That anyone connected to Eleanor might be watched." Clara felt the cold stone wall against her back. "You believed I was in danger. I believed you might possess information without knowing its value. And so you placed people around me? I made inquiries, you watched me. I ensured I would know if someone else began asking the same questions." Clara folded her arms, partly to hide the trembling in her hands. "Did you interfere with Thomas's debts?" Julian did not answer immediately, That delay hurt more than admission. "How much?" she asked. "It does not matter. It matters to me. Your brother owed money to men who were willing to use his name against you. I settled the account before they could. With whose permission? None. Did Thomas know? No. Did Nathaniel?" Julian's eyes hardened. "I do not know what Crow knew, but someone had begun asking whether financial pressure might persuade you to sell the ring." Clara touched the chain beneath her gown. "My mother made me promise never to part with it. Then she knew someone might try to obtain it. You should have told me. I could not be certain whom you trusted." The words opened a deeper wound. "You believed I might willingly give the ring to whoever destroyed your brother. I believed nothing about you. I knew nothing about you. And yet you decided where I would work, which debts my family would owe, and what dangers I was permitted to understand. I removed you from a vulnerable position. You placed me exactly where you wanted me." Julian's control fractured. "Would you have preferred I left you with Crow?" Clara stared at him. He closed his eyes briefly, as though regretting the words before they had finished leaving him. "You do not have the right to speak of him as though you rescued me from a marriage," she said. "No, you did not know whether I loved him. No, you did not know whether I would have chosen him even after learning he was weak. No, then do not confuse your intervention with mercy." Julian lowered his voice. "I do not." The anger in Clara began to give way to something more dangerous, disappointment. She had started to believe that beneath his secrecy there was honesty, that he defended her because he saw her clearly, that his attention in the schoolroom, his hand at her waist in the gallery, and his words before the guests had belonged to the present rather than to some old Ashcombe calculation. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. His gaze held hers. "To identify the ring. Only that. To learn what Eleanor told you. She told me nothing. I know that now, and before, I believed you might be concealing it." Clara looked away. Julian moved toward her, but stopped before coming too close. "I was wrong. That apology would mean more if it were not followed by another secret." He was silent. Clara understood there was still something he would not reveal. "What are you protecting?" she asked. "Rose, the estate, or yourself?" "All three. At least that is honest." She moved past him. "Clara." It was the first time he had used her name while they were alone. She stopped despite herself. "When I learned of the accusation, I knew it had been arranged," he said. "The brooch had not appeared by chance. Whoever placed it in that house believed you might lead them to the ring. And you allowed the accusation to stand. I forced your employer to withdraw every written complaint. After my engagement ended, his face changed. I did not know Crow would abandon you before the church, but you knew he had been warned." Julian did not deny it. A fresh realization came over her. "Nathaniel was told about my connection to Blackwood." "Yes. By you? No. Then by someone who knew you were searching for me." Julian looked toward the altered portrait. "That is what I fear." Clara's anger sharpened into clarity. If Nathaniel had known enough to abandon her, then someone inside Blackwood Hall had known enough to reach him. Lady Honoria had recognized Clara's mother. Lady Honoria had also arranged the house party and invited Nathaniel. "Where is Mr. Fenwick?" Clara asked. "In my study. I want to see every document concerning my brother's debts." Julian's expression grew guarded. "They are private accounts. They concern my family. They may also reveal the names of people I used to protect you. I am no longer asking for protection." "Clara, no," she faced him fully. "You told yourself secrecy kept me safe. It did not. It left me defenseless before people who knew more about my life than I did." Julian said nothing. "Tomorrow morning, I want the accounts, every letter containing my name and every report you commissioned. That may not be possible. Then neither is my cooperation." His gaze narrowed. "The Codicil requires you to remain. The Codicil requires cooperation. It does not require obedience." A long moment passed. Then Julian inclined his head. You shall have what can be given. What can be given? What does not place others at risk? Clara nearly turned away again. He added, and I will explain the rest when I am able. That is the same promise men make when they expect women to wait quietly. I do not expect you to wait quietly. No, she said. You have learned that much. She left him standing beneath the portrait. When Clara returned to her room, she found the door slightly open. The lamp beside her bed had been lit. Though she had left the room dark, nothing appeared disturbed at first. Then she saw her mother's prayer book lying open upon the pillow. Clara crossed the room slowly. The book had been inside her locked traveling trunk. A folded paper rested between its pages. She opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. If you wish to know why the Duke paid your brother's debts, ask him what he feared Thomas might discover in London. Beneath the message, someone had drawn the Ashcombe bird and crown. Clara searched the corridor, but it was empty. When she returned to the bed, she noticed a second object beneath the prayer book. It was a receipt bearing Julian's signature. The payment had been made 5 months earlier, not merely to settle Thomas's debts, but to purchase every letter Thomas had sent while searching for the truth about Eleanor Whitmore. Clara carried the receipt to Julian's study before reason could persuade her to wait until morning. The house had fallen quiet. Only a few lamps remained burning along the corridor, their flames bending whenever the wind pressed against the windows. Music from the ballroom had ended, and the visiting guests had withdrawn behind closed doors, leaving Blackwood Hall to its older silences. Julian stood over his desk with Mr. Fenwick beside him. Several documents lay arranged beneath the lamplight. Both men looked up when Clara entered. She placed the receipt on the desk. What did Thomas discover in London? Fenwick's gaze dropped immediately to the signature. Julian did not touch the paper. Where did you find this? In my room, beneath a prayer book that had been locked inside my trunk. He straightened. Someone entered your chamber. Do not pretend surprise is an answer. It is not pretense. Clara held out the anonymous note. Julian read it once, then passed it to Fenwick. The solicitor's face tightened. The seal has been copied poorly, but well enough to frighten someone who does not know the original, Clara said. What letters did you purchase from my brother? Julian moved around the desk. Thomas wrote to several people connected with your mother's early life. Why? Because he believed Eleanor had left money or property that should have passed to you. Clara stared at him. There was no property, no, but his inquiries led him to a former clerk who once worked for an Ashcombe solicitor. Fenwick removed a page from the leather case. The clerk told Thomas that a marriage involving the Whitmore name had been removed from a parish register outside York. Clara thought of the torn certificate hidden inside Rose's miniature. Margaret and Lord Adrian, most likely, Fenwick said. Why buy Thomas's letters? Julian answered before the solicitor could. Because one of them had been intercepted. By whom? I do not know. You always seem to discover danger without discovering the person responsible. His expression hardened. The intercepted letter was returned to Thomas with a warning. If he continued asking questions, his debts would be called in immediately, and your former employer would be informed that your family had attempted to extort an aristocratic estate. Clara's anger faltered. Julian continued. Thomas was frightened. He sold the correspondence to an agent who claimed to represent a private collector. The agent represented me. You could have approached him openly and explained that his sister was connected to a secret marriage, a missing child, and evidence concealed by my family. You might have trusted him. I had not yet learned whether he was being used. Clara looked down at the receipt. Did you read every letter? Yes. Did Thomas discover the name of the parish? He narrowed it to 3 churches. Then we shall search all 3. Julian's gaze moved to the anonymous note. You will remain here until I know who entered your room. No. That is not a request. Then it deserves no answer. Fenwick quietly gathered the documents from the desk. "I believe I shall speak with Mrs. Bell about the household keys." Neither Clara nor Julian acknowledged his departure. When the door closed, Julian lowered his voice. "Someone wants you to distrust me. They have received considerable assistance from you. I am aware." The admission disarmed her. He looked toward the receipt. "I should have told you about Thomas." "Yes. I believed silence would protect him. You use that explanation often, because I have made the same mistake often." Clara studied his face. He appeared weary rather than defensive. "Will you take me to the churches?" At first light, she had expected resistance. Why agree now? "Because whoever entered your room expects us to turn against one another. I would prefer to disappoint them." They left Blackwood Hall shortly after dawn. The sky was pale and heavy, promising more rain before evening. Julian drove the closed carriage himself, accompanied only by a groom riding behind them. Clara suspected he trusted fewer servants than he admitted. The first parish register contained no Ashcombe marriage. At the second church, several pages from the relevant year had been damaged by damp. The third stood beyond a small village north of York, its stone tower darkened by age and weather. An elderly clergyman received them in a cold vestry. At the mention of Margaret Whitmore, he crossed himself. "I was only a boy," he said. "My father served here before me." He spoke once of a marriage that brought trouble to the parish. "Was the marriage recorded?" Clara asked. "It was." Then the page disappeared. "Who removed it?" Julian said. "My father never told me. He feared losing the living." The clergyman opened a wooden chest and withdrew a narrow account book. "After his death, I found this among his private papers. Inside was an entry recording candles, flowers, and 2 witnesses for a private ceremony. The bride's name had faded, but the groom remained legible. Lord Adrian Ashcombe. Beneath it appeared a second name, Abigail Finch. "The witness from Eleanor's letter," Clara whispered. The clergyman nodded. "A dressmaker from York. She left the city many years ago." "Is she still alive?" "I cannot say." Julian copied the last address listed beside her name. By the time they returned to the road, rain had begun to fall. It came lightly at first, then with sudden force. Water rushed across the rutted lane, and the horses struggled against the mud. A sharp crack sounded beneath the carriage. One wheel dropped into a washed-out hollow. Clara was thrown sideways. Julian caught her before her head struck the door. The carriage stopped at a dangerous angle. "Are you injured?" he asked. "No." He released her only after he was certain she could sit upright. Outside, the groom called that the axle had split. The nearest village was several miles away, but Julian remembered an abandoned hunting lodge beyond the trees. They reached it on foot as daylight faded, wet and cold, despite the blankets carried from the carriage. The lodge consisted of one main room and a narrow loft. Dust covered the furniture, but the roof remained sound. Julian built a fire while the groom returned to the road in search of assistance. Clara removed her wet gloves and held her hands toward the flames. "This place belonged to Adrian," Julian said. She looked around. "Did he come here often?" "During the final year of his life." Julian attempted to close a broken shutter against the wind. The wood slipped and a jagged edge cut across his palm. He drew back sharply. "You are bleeding. It is nothing." That phrase has never improved an injury. Clara found a basin and clean cloth inside an old cabinet. Julian sat reluctantly while she washed the cut. His hand was larger than hers, marked by the pale scars of riding and years of estate work. She had expected the hands of a duke to be smooth. "You do not trust servants to repair windows?" she asked. "I do not employ servants in abandoned lodges. You might consider it." His mouth shifted faintly. Clara wrapped the cloth around his palm. "Why did Adrian accuse your father of betrayal?" Julian's expression changed. "He believed our father had forced Margaret to leave Blackwood. Did he?" "I do not know. My father refused to speak of her. Adrian accused him publicly and departed that same night. And then his horse returned without him. Clara's hands stilled. They found him near the river the following morning. He had been thrown on the northern road. You believe it was an accident. I have spent 6 years attempting to believe it. The fire cracked between them. Julian looked down at the bandage. If Rose is Adrian's legitimate daughter, then everything my father allowed society to believe about her was a lie. He may have been protecting her, or protecting the title. You are not your father. No, but I inherited the result of his silence. Clara released his hand. And if proving Rose's identity costs you Blackwood Hall, I will sign it away. She searched his face for hesitation and found none. You say that easily. There is nothing easy in it. This estate is your life. It is my duty. There is a difference. Julian's gaze rested upon her. I once believed duty required me to preserve everything my father left. Now I fear it requires me to dismantle it. Clara thought of the guests at Blackwood Hall, the painted portraits and Lady Honoria's careful authority. You would lose your title, perhaps, your influence, yes, your home. His voice softened. A house built upon a child's stolen name is not a home worth keeping. The words entered the quiet space between them. Clara became aware that they were sitting very close. Julian lifted his uninjured hand, then stopped before touching a loose strand of hair near her cheek. His restraint was more intimate than contact would have been. I did not bring you to Blackwood because I knew what you would mean to Rose, he said. Clara barely breathed. I brought you because I believed you were a key to my brother's secrets. I watched you because I did not trust you. And every day since your arrival, you have given me reason to be ashamed of both decisions. Julian. It was the first time she had spoken his name. Something unguarded appeared in his eyes. He leaned closer. Clara did not move away at first. She could feel the warmth of his breath, the hesitation beneath his control, and the question he refused to turn into a demand. Then she remembered the purchased letters, the months of observation, and every truth still locked behind his silence. She placed one hand against his chest. I cannot. Julian stopped immediately. A flicker of pain crossed his face, but he moved back. I understand. No, she said softly. I do not think either of us does. He rose and crossed to the window, leaving enough distance for her to breathe. They returned to Blackwood Hall shortly after noon the following day. Mrs. Bell met them in the entrance hall, her face pale. What has happened? Julian asked. The housekeeper looked at Clara. Your room was searched again. Clara hurried upstairs. The drawers had been emptied. Her clothes lay across the floor. Her mother's prayer book had been torn apart, and the mattress had been cut open. Rose stood in the doorway, crying silently. Clara looked toward the table where she had placed the silver miniature before leaving. Only an empty square remained in the dust. The portrait, the torn marriage certificate, and the initials of Rose's parents were gone. The empty square in the dust seemed more accusing than any written charge. Clara stood before the table, staring at the place where Rose's miniature had rested only the previous morning. The drawers behind her remained open, their contents scattered across the carpet. Her mother's prayer book lay in pieces upon the bed. Someone had not merely searched the room. They had wanted Clara to understand that nothing she possessed was safe. Julian entered without waiting to be announced. One look at the torn mattress and his face hardened. Who had access to this corridor, Mrs.? Bell remained near the doorway with Rose. The family, the senior servants, and several of the guests' maids seal the doors to the house. No carriage leaves until every room has been examined. Lady Honoria's voice came from the corridor. You cannot imprison your guests because a governess has misplaced a trinket. She entered with Marcus and Nathaniel behind her. Rose moved closer to Clara. It was not misplaced, Clara said. The room was searched. Honoria surveyed the damage with cool disapproval, or made to appear so. Julian turned toward her. Choose your next words carefully. I am choosing them for Rose's sake. We have strangers in the house, missing family documents, and a woman whose previous employment ended after a valuable object disappeared. Nathaniel lowered his eyes, performing reluctance. I had hoped never to speak of this again. Clara faced him, then surprise us. He removed a folded paper from his coat. This was found beneath a writing desk in the morning room. Mr. Fenwick, who had arrived behind Julian, took the page and read it. His expression darkened. "What is it?" Clara asked. A letter addressed to the editor of the London Sentinel. The London Sentinel was one of the most ruthless scandal sheets in the capital. It had ruined marriages, elections, and family names with equal enthusiasm. Fenwick continued reading silently. Julian held out his hand. "Give it to me." The solicitor obeyed. Clara watched Julian's gaze move down the page. "What does it say?" He did not answer immediately. Lady Honoria did. "It offers proof of an unlawful Ashcombe marriage in return for £500. Rose made a small sound. Clara felt every eye in the room turn toward her. "I did not write it," Nathaniel sighed. "The hand resembles yours. You would not know my hand. I received enough letters during our engagement." Clara remembered the letters she had sent him while he was in London earnest, trusting pages she now wished she had burned. "Where are those letters?" she asked. Nathaniel hesitated. "Destroyed. Then you possess nothing for comparison." Lady Honoria looked toward the overturned writing box on Clara's table. The ink and paper matched those in her room. "Half the house uses the same paper," Julian said, "but not half the house has need of £500. The insult struck precisely where Honoria intended. Clara thought of Thomas's debts, her lost employment, and the humiliating fact that everyone present knew how desperately she required money. Julian folded the letter. "This proves nothing." Nathaniel stepped forward. "There is more." From his pocket he produced a narrow silver clasp. Rose cried out. It was part of the missing miniature. Nathaniel placed it upon the table. "I found it inside Miss Whitmore's traveling cloak." Clara stared at him. "You entered my room?" "It was discovered during the search." "You placed it there." His expression became wounded. "Clara, I once intended to make you my wife. I have no pleasure in witnessing this. You had no difficulty witnessing my humiliation at the altar." Julian moved between them. "That is enough." Lady Honoria opened her fan. "No, Julian, it is not enough. Documents have disappeared from a guarded estate. A letter offers them to a newspaper. Part of the stolen miniature is found among Miss Whitmore's belongings. At what point does your judgment overcome your fascination?" The room fell silent. Clara looked at Julian. He did not respond to the accusation against his feelings. Instead, he turned to Fenwick. "Examine the letter, the clasp, and every lock in this room. No conclusion will be announced until the evidence has been tested." Honoria's smile was slight. "You refuse to dismiss her." "I refuse to condemn anyone, because the evidence has been arranged conveniently." "Then say plainly that you believe her innocent." Clara waited. Julian's gaze met hers. "I believe there are facts I do not yet understand." Pain moved through her with humiliating speed, not because he had accused her, because he had not trusted her enough to deny it without qualification. Lady Honoria closed her fan. "There, even Julian cannot offer the certainty you require." Clara looked away before anyone could see how deeply the hesitation had wounded her. Rose escaped Mrs. Bell's hand and ran to Clara. "She did not take it," the child said. Her voice trembled, but she repeated more loudly. "Clara did not take it." Clara knelt and held the girl's shoulders. "I know what I did not do." Rose glanced fearfully toward the adults. Clara softened her voice. "And so do you. That is enough for tonight. It was not enough. But Rose should not be made to carry another adult's burden." Mrs. Bell took the child away at Julian's request. Nathaniel and Marcus followed Lady Honoria into the corridor. Before leaving, Honoria looked once at the broken prayer book. There was satisfaction in her eyes. Julian closed the door after them. "Clara, you should continue your search." "I intend to. You should begin with me. That is what everyone expects." "That is not what I believe." You had an opportunity to say what you believed. His face tightened. If I defended you without examining the evidence, Honoria would claim I had lost the ability to act as Rose's guardian, and so my reputation must wait upon your strategy. This is not strategy. It is always strategy with you. He stepped closer. There are trustees in this house prepared to remove Rose from my care. If I appear to ignore evidence because of my personal regard for you, they will act. Your personal regard. The controlled phrase hurt more than an admission would have done. Clara crossed to the bed and began gathering the torn pages of her mother's book. Julian watched her. I will find who did this. After you have decided whether I deserve to be believed, I believe you. Privately. For now. Clara gave a quiet, bitter laugh. A private faith is of little use to a woman publicly condemned. He flinched. She wished he had argued. His silence made the distance between them feel permanent. A sealed envelope lay beneath the overturned dressing table. Clara had not noticed it earlier. She picked it up. The front bore her name in Fenwick's hand. Julian reached for it, but she stepped away and broke the seal herself. Inside was a report dated 8 months earlier. It described the Whitmore family ring in exact detail. The gold, the worn crest, the faint mark inside the band. Beneath the description were instructions to confirm whether Clara wore it daily and whether she had attempted to sell it. The report had been commissioned by Julian. Clara read the final line twice. Subject appears unaware of the ring's origin. Continued observation advised. She looked at him. You watched me for 8 months. His face lost color. I did not authorize anyone to place that report here. But you authorized the report. Yes, the answer broke whatever remained of her hope. You did not bring me to Blackwood Hall because you trusted me. No, you brought me because you believed I might lead you to evidence. At first, and now I am expected to be grateful that your suspicion has become affection. That is not what I ask. What do you ask? Julian opened his mouth, then stopped. He could command an estate, silence a ballroom, and challenge his own family. Yet when Clara asked him for the truth, he still reached first for caution. She folded the report. I shall leave in the morning. The roads remain poor. I will walk to the village if necessary. The Codicil may place conditions upon your estate. It places none upon my dignity. His voice lowered. Someone searched your room twice. Leaving alone would place you in greater danger. Remaining here has not protected me. Julian stood motionless. Clara saw the instinct to forbid her departure rise within him. She also saw him force it down. If you choose to leave, he said, at last, I will not hold you. The words should have felt like freedom. Instead, they felt like abandonment spoken with better manners. He left without another word. Clara remained beside the ruined bed until the room grew dark. Later, while collecting the torn pages of her mother's prayer book, she noticed that one section of the binding had not been cut. A narrow strip of paper had been sewn beneath the leather spine. She opened the seam with a hairpin. Inside was a message written in Eleanor's hand. Margaret did not die without leaving proof. Seek the woman who dressed the bride. Abigail knows where the second witness went. Beneath the words was an address in York. Clara closed her hand around the paper. Before dawn, she packed what remained of her belongings. She left the report upon Julian's desk and the Ashcombe ring hanging around her neck. Rose was still asleep when Clara entered the child's room. She did not wake her. She merely placed a folded note beside the pillow and kissed her gently upon the hair. At the foot of the staircase, Mrs. Bell waited with Clara's cloak. His Grace will follow you. I am not asking him to. No, the housekeeper said. That has never prevented him from doing what he believes necessary. Clara looked once toward the silent corridor leading to Julian's study. If he follows, it must be with the truth. I will accept nothing less. Then she stepped through the doors of Blackwood Hall alone, carrying the address of the one woman who might prove Rose's identity and expose the person who had destroyed Clara's life before she ever understood why. By the time Clara reached the village, dawn had begun to thin the darkness above the moors. Her boots were wet, her hands numb inside their gloves, and every step away from Blackwood Hall carried a weight she had not expected. She had imagined departure would restore something to her pride, perhaps, or the certainty that her life still belonged to her. Instead, she felt as though she had left part of herself sleeping in Rose's room, and another part standing silently behind Julian's study door. She refused to turn back. The first coach to York departed shortly after sunrise. Clara spent the journey beside a farmer's wife carrying 2 baskets of apples, watching hedgerows and fields pass beneath a low grey sky. The address hidden inside Eleanor's prayer book led her to a narrow street behind York's old market. A faded wooden sign hung above a shuttered dressmaker's shop. Finch and daughter Mantuous, bridal gowns and alterations dust coated the windows. The door was locked. Clara knocked until a curtain moved on the floor above. Several minutes later, an elderly woman opened the door. She was small and stooped, with white hair gathered beneath a plain cap. Her eyes, however, were sharp. "The shop is closed. I am looking for Mrs. Abigail Finch. You have found what remains of her." Clara removed the chain from beneath her collar and held up the Ashcombe ring. The woman's expression changed. She opened the door wider. "Come inside before someone sees you." The shop smelled of lavender, dust, and old fabric. Unfinished gowns hung beneath linen sheets, their silent forms resembling women waiting for a ball that would never begin. Abigail led Clara into a small sitting room at the back. "Your name," she said. "Clara Whitmore." The old woman closed her eyes. "Eleanor's child. You knew my mother." "I dressed both her daughters." Clara's breath caught. "My mother had only 2 children, Thomas and me." "No." Abigail lowered herself into a chair. "Eleanor had 3. The room seemed to shift around Clara. Abigail motioned toward the opposite seat. "Sit down, child. Some truths should not be heard while standing." Clara remained where she was. "Who was Margaret? Your elder half-sister?" The answer was so simple that Clara could not accept it. "My mother never spoke of her, because speaking could have destroyed all of you." Abigail folded her hands in her lap. Eleanor was barely 17 when Margaret was born. The child's father was connected to the Ashcombe family. Though not in any manner society would have forgiven, Eleanor had neither money nor protection. The late Duke arranged for the infant to be raised quietly at Blackwood Hall under another name. Why would a duke take responsibility for a servant's child? Abigail looked toward the ring. Because Margaret carried Ashcombe blood, Clara felt suddenly cold. Whose daughter was she? That truth belonged to Eleanor, and she never gave me permission to speak it. What matters now is that Margaret grew up at Blackwood Hall, believing herself the orphaned daughter of a distant family relation. And Lord Adrian? They fell in love before either understood the danger of her birth. Abigail's face softened with remembered sorrow. He came to this shop with her in the spring of 1809. He wanted a bridal gown made without the knowledge of his father. Margaret chose ivory silk, plain except for seed pearls at the cuffs. She said she did not need to resemble a duchess. She only wanted to look like a woman freely chosen. Clara sat at last. "You witnessed their marriage." "I did." The ceremony took place at St. Bartholomew's outside York. The vicar's brother served as the second witness. Adrian placed that ring upon Margaret's hand. Clara looked down at it. "My mother wore it. Margaret gave it to Eleanor after Rose was born. She believed the ring and marriage certificate would be safer apart." Why were they hiding? Because Lady Honoria discovered the marriage. Clara had expected the name, yet hearing it spoken aloud still struck like a door closing. Abigail continued. Honoria had spent years arranging an alliance between Adrian and the daughter of a marquess. The marriage would have brought money and political influence to Blackwood. Margaret threatened all of it. More importantly, If her true parentage became known, questions would have been raised about the late Duke and the inheritance. What did Honoria do? She persuaded the Duke that scandal would destroy both sons. Margaret was removed from Blackwood while Adrian was away. Rose was kept behind. Clara's eyes burned. A mother was separated from her child. Margaret returned for her. Adrian intended to expose everything, but before they could leave together, he dyed the hunting lodge, the carved initials, and Julian's letter returned to Clara. Margaret died too. Not immediately. She became ill after months of hiding. Eleanor cared for her until the end. Abigail's voice weakened. Margaret made us promise that Rose would one day know she had been loved. Clara covered her mouth. All her life, she had believed Eleanor's silences came from shame or hardship. She had never imagined they concealed a daughter stolen by the power of an aristocratic family. Where is the complete marriage certificate? I kept one half, Adrian kept the other. Abigail crossed to a cabinet and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay folded lace, several old calling cards, and a strip of yellowed paper bearing the other half of the red Ashcombe seal. Clara joined it in her mind with the torn page once hidden inside Rose's miniature. Together, they would prove the marriage. She reached toward it, but Abigail did not release the paper. The certificate is not enough. What else is there? The brooch. Clara's hand stilled. Margaret hid a signed statement inside it. She described her marriage, Rose's birth, and the names of those who forced her from Blackwood. Eleanor carried the brooch away after Margaret died. It later appeared in my employer's house. Abigail's gaze sharpened. Then someone found Eleanor's hiding place. I was accused of taking it, but I never touched it. Who accused you? Lady Harbury, my former employer. Who removed the brooch from her house? I do not know. Abigail stood and went to a small desk. From beneath a stack of account books, she withdrew an old ledger. A man came here several months ago asking about Margaret's gown. He claimed he was investigating stolen Ashcombe property. Clara's pulse quickened. What was his name? He gave none, but I had seen him once before. He accompanied Lady Harbury when she ordered a morning gown. Abigail turned the ledger toward Clara. Beside the date was a brief description. Tall gentleman, fair hair, grey eyes, wore a silver crow upon his watch chain. Nathaniel's family crest was a silver crow. He asked about the brooch. Abigail said. He offered money for the witness statement. When I refused, he told me Clara Whitmore would suffer for the silence of her mother. Clara gripped the edge of the desk. Nathaniel had not merely abandoned her because of the accusation. He had helped create it. A knock sounded at the front door. Abigail extinguished the lamp immediately. You were followed. Clara placed the marriage certificate inside her dress. The knock came again, firm but controlled. Then a familiar voice reached them through the shop. Mrs. Finch, I mean you no harm. I am looking for Miss Whitmore, Julian. Clara closed her eyes. Some part of her was relieved. Another part resented him for making relief possible. She entered the front room and opened the door only far enough to see him. Julian stood on the pavement without a servant or carriage in sight. Mud marked his boots and rain darkened the shoulders of his coat. I told Mrs. Bell I did not want you to follow me. She informed me, and you came anyway. Yes. Clara began to close the door. Julian did not stop it with his hand. I will leave if you ask me to, he said. But before I do, you should know that Rose's miniature was found. Clara froze. Where? In Lady Honoria's writing desk. Then why is she not already exposed? Because the miniature was placed there by someone who wanted it found. Honoria claims you planted it before leaving. Clara gave a bitter laugh. Of course she does. There is more. Nathaniel departed Blackwood before dawn. She looked back toward Abigail. The old woman stood in the shadows. Listening, Julian continued. He took several papers from Fenwick's room. One was the address of the church we visited. He knows we found Abigail's name. Julian's gaze moved past Clara and settled upon the elderly woman. Then Mrs. Finch is no longer safe here. Abigail stepped forward. Neither is the truth. Clara opened the door fully. Julian entered but kept his distance from her. I made a promise before you left, he said. You asked for the truth. This time I have brought all of it. He removed a packet of letters from inside his coat and placed it upon the counter. The top letter bore Nathaniel Crow's signature. Clara unfolded it. It was a receipt for the collection of a jeweled Ashcombe brooch from Lady Harbury's home. On the morning Clara was meant to be married, beneath Nathaniel's name appeared the person who had paid him, Lady Honoria Ashcombe. Clara looked up. Julian's face was pale with controlled fury. Nathaniel did not abandon you because he believed you were guilty, he said. He abandoned you because Honoria paid him to make the world believe you were. Clara read Nathaniel's receipt again. The paper trembled between her fingers, though the room itself had become unnaturally still. Lady Honoria Ashcombe. The name appeared beneath a series of payments. One made before Clara's dismissal, another before the wedding, and a final amount after Nathaniel disappeared from the church. Each sum had been recorded with the cold precision of a household expense. Abigail Finch lowered herself into the nearest chair. So she found the brooch, Julian nodded, or arranged for Nathaniel to find it first. Clara looked at the man she had once expected to marry, as though he were standing before her again. Smiling across a church aisle, while secretly knowing she would be disgraced before she reached it. How did you obtain this? Fenwick found the payments concealed among Marcus Vale's estate accounts. Marcus knew. I cannot yet prove how much he knew. The account is held in his name, but Honoria has controlled his finances for years. Clara folded the receipt carefully. Why would she keep evidence? Because powerful people rarely believe the evidence against them will ever be examined by someone they cannot silence. Abigail opened the wooden box and removed the torn half of the marriage certificate. She cannot silence this. Julian studied the page. Not alone. Clara looked toward the bridal gowns hidden beneath linen sheets. The miniature contains the other half. It has been recovered, Julian said. Fenwick is guarding it, and Margaret's statement, still inside the brooch, if Honoria has not destroyed it. Abigail shook her head. The brooch was constructed with a concealed chamber. It cannot be opened without the ring and the clasp from Margaret's wedding gown. She crossed to the box once more and lifted a small pearl fastener shaped like a flower. Clara stared at it. My mother hid the ring. You kept the clasp. We believed no one person should carry every proof. Julian's gaze moved between the ring and the pearl. If Honoria still has the brooch, she may not know how to open it. She invited Nathaniel to Blackwood because she needed Clara, Abigail said. Or rather, she needed the ring Clara carried. Clara understood at once. The accusations, the searched bedroom, the forged report and the missing miniature had all been designed to frighten her into surrendering the ring or to discredit her before she learned its purpose. We must return to Blackwood, she said. Julian's expression tightened. Nathaniel may be waiting on the road. Then he will discover I am no longer traveling alone. I will not take you into danger merely because you wish to confront Honoria. Clara stepped closer. You told me you had brought the truth. Do not begin withholding my choices again. This is not about control. It becomes control the moment you decide which risks belong to me. Abigail watched them with quiet interest. Julian looked toward the darkened street. What do you propose? We return openly. We do not hide Mrs. Finch the certificate or the receipts. Honoria has survived because every person she harmed was forced into secrecy. And if she destroys the brooch before we arrive, she will not. Clara touched the ring at her throat. She still needs this. They reached Blackwood Hall shortly before sunset. The house was brighter than Clara had ever seen it. Every window glowed against the darkening moor, and a line of carriages stretched from the entrance steps toward the gates. Mrs. Bell met them beneath the portico. Lady Honoria has brought the gathering forward, she whispered. The trustees are assembled. Half the county is in the ballroom. "Where is Rose?" Clara asked. "With Mr. Fenwick. His Grace's rooms have been guarded since noon." Julian turned to a footman. "Take Mrs. Finch to Fenwick. No one enters the East Study without my permission." Abigail caught Clara's hand before leaving. "Your mother spent her life protecting the truth because she believed open defiance would destroy you. Perhaps she was wrong. She was trying to keep us alive, yes, but survival is not the same as freedom." Clara closed her fingers around the older woman's hand. "I will remember." Music drifted through the doors of the ballroom. Lady Honoria had gathered the guests beneath the chandeliers, as though preparing a trial disguised as entertainment. The estate trustees stood near the fireplace. Lady Cecily and her father occupied the center of the room. Marcus remained beside his mother, pale and restless. Nathaniel stood before them all. Clara felt Julian's attention shift toward her. "You need not enter with me." She looked at him. "That is precisely how I intend to enter." Together they crossed the threshold. The musicians stopped. A wave of whispers moved through the ballroom. Lady Honoria's face did not change, though the fan in her hand closed sharply. "Julian," she said, "we had begun to fear Miss Whitmore's departure had delayed you indefinitely." Clara answered before he could. "My departure revealed more than my presence ever did." Nathaniel's expression tightened. Lady Honoria turned to the trustees. "As you see, Miss Whitmore has returned, despite leaving a written admission of her intention to sell private family documents." "The letter was forged," Julian said. "That remains unproven, not for long." Mr. Fenwick entered through a side door with Rose beside him. Mrs. Bell followed closely. Rose saw Clara and ran across the ballroom. The guests parted before her. She threw her arms around Clara's waist. "Mother." The word rang through the room more clearly than the music had. Clara knelt and held her. "I came back," she whispered. Rose buried her face against Clara's shoulder. Lady Honoria's voice cut through the silence. "This is exactly the confusion I warned against. Miss Whitmore has encouraged a vulnerable child to replace her deceased mother with a stranger." Rose lifted her head. "She is not a stranger." Clara saw tears in the child's eyes and rose, keeping Rose close against her side. Nathaniel stepped forward with a document in his hand. "Whatever affection the child feels, it cannot alter Miss Whitmore's history." He held up the original statement accusing Clara of stealing the brooch. This declaration was signed by Lady Harbury, her housekeeper and 2 servants, "none of whom saw me take anything," Clara said, "but all of whom confirmed that the brooch vanished while under your care." Lady Honoria looked toward Julian. "The trustees require only your acknowledgement that Miss Whitmore is unsuitable to remain in the household. Rose may then be placed temporarily with relatives until this disorder is resolved." Marcus looked away. Clara felt Rose's fingers tighten around hers. Julian crossed the ballroom and took the accusation document from Nathaniel. "You have repeated this lie often enough," he said. Nathaniel attempted a smile. "It is not a lie merely because it displeases you. No, it is a lie because you were paid to create it." A murmur passed through the guests. Julian tore the document once, then again. The pieces fell across the polished floor. Lady Honoria's composure finally cracked. "You have just destroyed evidence. I have destroyed an accusation. The evidence is elsewhere." He turned toward the assembled guests. "Miss Whitmore was dismissed without proof, abandoned through deliberate deception, and brought into this house under circumstances I failed to explain honestly. For my part in that secrecy, I accept responsibility." Clara stared at him. Julian continued. "But no person in this room will use my mistakes to condemn her. She stands under no man's ownership and requires no title to make her truthful." Lady Honoria stepped forward. "Your judgment has been corrupted. My judgment has been corrected." One of the trustees, Lord Harcourt, raised his hand. "There remains the matter of Lady Rose's parentage, Mr. Fenwick has informed us that a second testament has been discovered among the late Duke's papers." Fenwick's expression became grave. "I did not discover it," he said. "Lady Honoria presented it this afternoon." Every gaze turned toward her. Honoria opened her fan. "The document was entrusted to me for the protection of the family." Fenwick addressed Julian. "According to its terms, should Lady Rose be recognized as Lord Adrian's legitimate child, the Blackwood estate must pass away from your Grace's line and into trusteeship until she reaches maturity." Clara looked at Julian. He did not appear surprised. "You knew," she whispered. "I suspected." Lady Honoria's voice softened with false sympathy. "You see now why this inquiry cannot be guided by sentiment. If Clara's claims are accepted, Julian loses Blackwood Hall, its revenues, and perhaps his right to the dukedom itself." The guests began whispering again. Rose looked up at Julian. "Will they make you leave?" He crossed to her and knelt. "No one will make you disappear to preserve my comfort." Lady Honoria's face became pale. Julian rose. He removed the ducal signet ring from his hand and placed it upon the table before the trustees. "Until Rose's parentage is established, I surrender authority over the estate accounts and every privilege dependent upon the disputed will." Lord Harcourt stared at him. "Your Grace, consider carefully." "I have considered nothing else for 6 years." Lady Honoria took one step toward him. "You would surrender Blackwood for the daughter of a woman who deceived this family?" Julian looked at Rose. "For my brother's daughter." Then his gaze moved to Clara. "And for the truth this family has punished women for carrying." Silence filled the ballroom. Clara understood in that moment that Julian had chosen, without knowing whether she would remain, forgive him or ever accept his love. He had chosen the truth when it appeared certain to cost him everything. Lady Honoria recovered first. "Then the estate will pass to trustees, and Miss Whitmore's usefulness is at an end." Clara reached beneath her collar and drew out the ring. "No," she said. The gold caught the chandelier light. "Her usefulness is only beginning." Every eye turned toward her. Clara placed the ring beside Julian's signet on the table. "The will you presented is not the last document hidden inside Blackwood Hall." Lady Honoria's fan stopped moving. Clara looked directly at her. "And before this evening ends, I shall prove who forged it." Lady Honoria stared at the ring upon the table. For the first time since Clara had known her, the older woman did not appear merely displeased or inconvenienced. She appeared afraid. "You have already opened the portrait compartment," Honoria said. "There was nothing inside except Adrian's sentimental letters." Clara held her gaze. "There was nothing inside the compartment we found." A murmur moved through the ballroom. Julian looked at Clara with sudden understanding. "There is another. Margaret's message said the ring would speak when Blackwood refused the truth. We assumed she meant the first lock, because it was the first one Rose showed us." Clara turned toward Mr. Fenwick. "Did you bring what I requested?" The solicitor reached inside his leather case and removed the silver miniature. Its broken clasp had been repaired, and the torn half of the marriage certificate remained behind the portrait. Beside it, he placed the portion Abigail Finch had guarded for 6 years. The two edges matched perfectly. Lord Harcourt leaned closer. "The seal appears genuine. It proves a ceremony was recorded," Lady Honoria said. "It does not establish that the child is legitimate. Documents may be altered, witnesses may be mistaken." The ballroom doors opened. Abigail Finch entered on Mrs. Bell's arm. Though the old dressmaker's gown was plain and her steps were slow, the room gave way before her more completely than it had for any duchess. "I am not mistaken," Abigail said. "I dressed Margaret Whitmore for her wedding. I stood beside her when she married Lord Adrian Ashcombe. I watched him place that ring upon her hand." Honoria's face tightened. The memory of an elderly tradeswoman cannot determine the future of a dukedom. "No," Clara said, "but the bride's own statement can." Nathaniel shifted toward the door. Julian noticed. "Remain where you are, Crow. I have no reason to submit to your commands now that you have surrendered authority." "You are not remaining because of my authority." Clara took the small pearl clasp from her pocket. "You are remaining because you know what this opens." Nathaniel's face lost its color. The reaction did not escape the guests. Clara looked toward Lady Honoria. "You found Margaret's brooch years ago, but you could not open its hidden chamber. The mechanism required two objects entrusted to different women, Margaret's wedding ring and the clasp from her bridal gown." Honoria gave a quiet laugh. "A touching invention. Then you will not object to proving it false." Clara turned toward the altered family portrait, visible through the open doors of the adjoining gallery. Rose discovered that Margaret had been painted out of the Ashcombe family. But the figure was not the only thing concealed. She took Rose's hand. Together they crossed into the portrait gallery. Julian followed, then Fenwick, Abigail, and the trustees. The remaining guests came behind them, their whispers passing beneath the painted faces of generations who had relied upon silence to protect them. Clara stopped before the portrait of the late Duke and his sons. The dark paint covering Margaret's figure had been partially removed. A young woman was now visible beside Adrian. Her hand resting upon his chair, Rose touched the edge of the frame. "There," she said. Beneath Margaret's painted hand was a carved flower, almost identical to Abigail's pearl clasp. Clara fitted the clasp into its center. Nothing happened. Then she placed the Ashcombe ring into a second indentation concealed beneath the frame. A mechanism shifted inside the wall. The entire lower section of the frame opened outward. Behind it was a narrow iron box. Lady Honoria stepped back. Julian moved toward the box, but Clara raised a hand. "Allow me." His gaze met hers. Then he stepped aside. Clara opened it. Inside lay the missing jeweled brooch, several folded documents, and a small leather ledger bound with a faded blue cord. The brooch was shaped like the Ashcombe emblem, a gold bird with outstretched wings above a crown. Clara placed the ring against the bird's breast and pressed the pearl clasp into a tiny opening beneath one wing. The back of the brooch opened. A tightly folded paper slid into her palm. Abigail closed her eyes. Margaret's statement. Fenwick unfolded it carefully and began to read. Margaret Whitmore declared that she had lawfully married Lord Adrian Ashcombe before two witnesses. She identified Rose as their legitimate daughter. She described how Lady Honoria had threatened to accuse Eleanor of theft, destroy Adrian's inheritance, and separate Margaret from her child, unless the marriage remained secret. The final lines had been written in a weaker hand. "If my daughter is ever told that I abandoned her, let this stand as my answer. I left Blackwood only because Lady Honoria promised that Rose would suffer for every truth I spoke." Rose pressed herself against Clara. Julian turned toward his aunt. "You told me Margaret chose to leave." Honoria lifted her chin. "I told you what was necessary to preserve the family. You told a child that her mother did not want her. I prevented a scandal that would have destroyed all of you." "No," Clara said. "You created the scandal and chose who would be sacrificed to contain it." Fenwick opened the remaining documents from the iron box. There were letters in Lady Honoria's handwriting instructing Nathaniel to recover the ring from Clara. There were payments to Lady Harbury for placing the brooch where Clara could be accused of taking it. There was the original correspondence ordering servants to remove Margaret's name from household records. At the bottom of the box lay Marcus Vale's estate ledger. Marcus took one look at it and closed his eyes. Fenwick turned the pages. These entries show repeated withdrawals from Lady Rose's trust. Lord Harcourt's expression became severe. "For what purpose?" Marcus answered before his mother could. "To cover my debts." Honoria turned on him. "Be silent." "No." The single word startled the room. Marcus faced the trustees. "My mother transferred the money through accounts bearing my name. I knew some of it came from Blackwood, though I allowed myself not to ask from whom. When I attempted to refuse further payments, she reminded me that exposure would ruin us both." "You ungrateful fool," Honoria whispered. Marcus looked at Rose. "I was a coward, But the child should not pay for it. Nathaniel moved again toward the door. Clara held up his signed receipts. You collected the brooch from Lady Harbury on the morning of our wedding. His face hardened. You cannot prove why. No, Clara said. But Lady Honoria's letters can. Fenwick unfolded one. Mr. Crowe will withdraw publicly. Miss Whitmore must be left with neither husband nor respectable employment. A woman disgraced before witnesses will never be believed if she later makes claims against Blackwood. The ballroom guests stared at Nathaniel. Clara had once imagined that exposing him would bring satisfaction. Instead, she felt only distance, as though the man who had left her before the altar belonged to a life she had already outgrown. Nathaniel looked toward Honoria. You promised the receipts would be destroyed. A shocked silence followed his words. Honoria's expression became murderous in its stillness. Nathaniel realized too late what he had admitted. She arranged everything, he said quickly. The accusation, the payment, the letters. She told me Clara carried proof that could destroy the estate. And you agreed to destroy Clara first, Julian said. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. Fenwick turned to the trustees. The evidence establishes conspiracy, misuse of trust funds, forgery, and deliberate defamation. Lady Honoria can no longer serve as trustee or exercise authority over any Ashcombe property. Honoria looked around the gallery, as though expecting some old loyalty to rise in her defense. None came. Clara stepped forward. There is one more condition in Margaret's statement. Fenwick gave her the page. Clara read aloud. Should the funds intended for my daughter be recovered, a portion shall establish a refuge and school for women deprived of livelihood through false accusation or family coercion. The institution shall bear the Whitmore name, so that what was erased from one house may protect women beyond it. Lady Honoria's face went white. The money she had diverted to preserve her influence would now create the very institution Clara's disgrace had made necessary. Lord Harcourt addressed the trustees. Lady Honoria's control over the trusts is revoked immediately. All diverted assets will be restored to Lady Rose. The Vale property obtained through those funds will be transferred according to Margaret Ashcombe's direction. Clara looked at Honoria. I do not ask society to treat you as you treated my mother, Margaret, or me. I ask only that you live without the power you used to silence us. Honoria's fan slipped from her hand. No one moved to retrieve it. Fenwick gathered the evidence and then examined the second will Honoria had presented. He placed it beside an original letter from the late Duke. The hand is an imitation. The seal was made from a later mold, and one of the named witnesses had been dead for 3 years when this document was supposedly signed. Julian's expression remained controlled, but Clara saw his hand close at his side. Lord Harcourt looked up. Then the disputed will is invalid. Fenwick nodded. Lady Rose is the legitimate daughter of Lord Adrian and Margaret Ashcombe. Her inheritance will be restored and protected independently. And the dukedom? Clara asked. Every gaze turned toward the solicitor. Fenwick allowed himself the smallest smile. His grace never lost it. Julian looked at Clara across the scattered letters, broken seals, and restored portrait. The title he had surrendered for Rose had been returned to him. But the man looking at Clara no longer seemed to need it as proof of who he was. The truth did not restore Blackwood Hall in a single evening. For weeks afterward, solicitors arrived with locked cases. Trustees examined accounts that had gone unquestioned for years. Letters were copied, statements witnessed, and every property connected to Rose's inheritance was placed beyond the control of Julian, Marcus, or any future guardian. Lady Honoria left Blackwood Hall before sunrise on the morning after her exposure. She departed through the same entrance where Clara had arrived during the storm, though no household member gathered to witness her leaving. She was permitted an income sufficient for an ordinary life, but every position of authority she had once held was removed. Nathaniel Crowe remained in Yorkshire long enough to sign a full confession. He claimed he had been frightened by Lady Honoria's influence and tempted by the money she offered. Clara listened without interruption as he attempted to explain that he had never intended her disgrace to become permanent. "You left me before an altar," she said when he finished. "You knew I was innocent, yet you allowed every person I trusted to believe otherwise." Nathaniel lowered his eyes. "I was weak." Yes, he looked up, perhaps expecting anger, perhaps hoping for forgiveness dramatic enough to lessen his shame. Clara felt neither. "You were weak," she repeated, "and you allowed another person to turn that weakness into cruelty. I hope you remember the difference." She left him in the solicitor's office and never spoke to him again. Marcus surrendered his claim to the Vale property, purchased through Rose's trust. He remained responsible for part of the missing money, though Julian persuaded the trustees to allow him time to repay it rather than leaving innocent tenants without an estate manager. It was not mercy without consequence. Marcus would spend years rebuilding what his silence had helped damage. Clara approved. Punishment alone could satisfy a crowd. Responsibility had to last after the crowd departed. The restoration of Rose's identity took place in the library on a clear winter morning mister. Fenwick placed the marriage certificate, Margaret's statement, and Rose's birth record upon the long table where Clara had first learned of the codicil. "Lady Rose Margaret Ashcombe," he announced, "lawful daughter of Lord Adrian Ashcombe and Margaret Whitmore Ashcombe." Rose sat between Clara and Julian. "Does that mean everyone must believe Mama loved me?" Clara's throat tightened. "It means the truth can no longer be hidden." Rose looked toward Julian. "And you are still the Duke, so I am told. Do you still have to leave?" "No," the child considered this solemnly, then reached beneath the table and took both their hands. "Then the papers have finally done something sensible." Mr. Fenwick removed his spectacles and pretended to examine them. Julian looked down, concealing a smile. Though the forged will had been declared invalid, Julian voluntarily signed new protections for Rose. Her inheritance would be held by independent trustees, and no future Duke of Blackwood could borrow against it, alter it, or use her marriage to control the estate. "You are surrendering authority the law allows you to keep," Lord Harcourt observed. "The law allowed my family to conceal too much already," Julian replied. Clara watched him sign the final page. He did not look toward her for approval. That was how she knew the change in him was real. The Whitmore School was established in a former manor belonging to the Vale estate. Its windows overlooked an orchard, and its rooms were large enough for classrooms, private living quarters and workshops where women could learn bookkeeping, sewing, correspondence, and household management. Clara insisted the school would not be a place where women were merely hidden from scandal. It would prepare them to live beyond it. She accepted the position of director and refused Julian's offer to fund her personal expenses. "You intend to argue with me over every sum?" he asked, while they inspected the unfinished schoolroom. "Only those intended to make me dependent, and if I donate books, the school may accept them. Furniture, if properly recorded. A carriage, no. A horse, certainly not. A winter coat," Clara turned toward him. "That depends. Upon what? Whether it is offered to the director of the school or to a woman you believe incapable of purchasing her own." Julian considered this. "May I offer it to a woman who insists upon standing in cold buildings while arguing with tradesmen? That would be acceptable." He smiled. The expression still appeared rarely, but Clara had learned to recognize the moments before it came. Their affection had not erased what happened between them. Clara did not forget that Julian had watched her, arranged her employment, and withheld truths he believed himself entitled to control. Julian did not ask her to forget. He apologized without explaining his actions away, and afterward he proved the apology through patience. He shared information before she demanded it. He asked rather than instructed. Most importantly, he accepted that Clara's future might lead away from Blackwood Hall. For several weeks, they spoke only of Rose, the school and the estate investigation. Then, one evening, near the end of winter, Julian asked Clara to walk with him through the portrait gallery. The altered painting had been restored. Margaret now stood beside Adrian in her ivory wedding gown, her face turned toward him with a quiet happiness that years of dark paint had failed to destroy. Rose's silver miniature rested beneath the portrait. Julian stopped before it. "I once believed this house represented everything I was required to protect," he said. "The name, the title, and every decision made before I was born." Clara waited. "I know now that a family is not preserved by protecting its lies. No, it is preserved by refusing to pass them forward." He removed something from his coat. It was not the ducal signet, it was a simple gold band. Clara looked at it but did not reach for it. Julian's voice remained controlled, though she heard the uncertainty beneath it. "I will not ask you to remain, because Rose loves you. I will not ask because your name belongs to Blackwood's history, or because society now considers you innocent." He took a breath. "I ask because I love the woman who challenged me, when every person in my life had learned to agree. I love your courage, though it exposes my failures. I love your compassion, though it is never obedient. And I love you enough to know that your refusal must remain possible." Clara's eyes burned. "You once arranged my path to this house without asking whether I wished to come." "I did. You believed protection gave you the right to decide for me." "Yes, and now, I would rather watch you leave freely than keep you through obligation." The gallery was very quiet. Clara looked at Margaret's restored portrait, then toward the windows where morning mist no longer concealed the gardens. "If the ring, the certificate, and Rose had never connected us," she asked, "would you still choose me?" Julian did not hesitate. "The ring brought you through my door. It did not make me search for you in every room after you left." A tear escaped before Clara could prevent it. Julian did not reach to wipe it away. He waited. That patience gave her the answer she had needed from him since the first night. Clara held out her hand. Yes, his composure broke in a breath that was nearly a laugh. He placed the ring upon her finger, then lifted her hand to his lips. When he kissed her, there was no audience, no agreement, and no inheritance condition standing between them. Only choice. Their wedding took place in the small church outside York, where Adrian and Margaret had once made the same vows in secrecy. This time the doors remained open. Abigail Finch sat in the first pew beside Mrs. Bell. Thomas stood proudly near the altar, his debts repaid through his own work rather than Julian's intervention. Marcus attended quietly and left a written pledge of his first repayment to Rose's trust. Rose scattered winter flowers along the aisle and informed everyone that Clara had been her mother long before the law understood it. After the ceremony, she gave Clara the restored silver miniature. "There is something behind Mama's picture," she whispered. Inside the frame was a final folded letter, written in Margaret's weakening hand. "My dearest Clara, you may never know me, but I have known of you since Eleanor first placed you in my arms. If the ring reaches you, then fear has outlived me, but not the truth. Do not carry our silence as though it were your shame. Use it to open the door we could not." Clara read the letter beside Julian beneath the winter sunlight. For the first time, she understood why her mother had never sold the ring, even during their poorest years. It was not merely evidence. It was a promise passed from one silenced woman to another. Years later, a new portrait hung in the gallery, where Margaret's image had once been concealed. Clara stood beside Julian, not behind him. Rose stood between them, holding one of their hands in each of hers. Through the painted windows behind them, the Blackwood gardens opened beneath a clear morning sky. Visitors often paused before that portrait and asked why the Duchess of Blackwood wore an old family ring upon a chain, rather than hiding it safely among the estate jewels. Clara always gave the same answer. because some inheritances are not meant to prove what we possess. She would look toward Rose, toward Julian, and toward Margaret's restored place among the Ashcombes. They remind us of what no one should ever be permitted to erase. Thank you for listening to Clara and Julian's journey through betrayal, sacrifice, and restored truth. Do you believe Julian deserved Clara's forgiveness after secretly controlling the path that brought her to Blackwood Hall? Or should some betrayals remain unforgiven even when love is sincere? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, subscribe and join us for more cinematic tales of hidden heirs, guarded dukes and women brave enough to challenge the secrets of powerful families.